Now, Kondratiev argued this, that what happens is that you get this. I've broken the two phases into these big thick arrows. So he argues that you get a bit at the beginning where new technology is deployed. Remember that word, deployed, not developed or invented, deployed. Where capital is invested, where there's a spurt of growth. As the period develops, the technology that's been invented gets standardized, the growth slows, business models mature. A turning point comes when business models are exhausted. I'm putting a lot of this into modern language rather than into the language he himself used. And recessions become more common. Things become more troubled. Finally, the whole model, or the whole 50-year period that began with the upsurge ends with falling prices, deflation, depression, agricultural prices down. That's basically what he described. He was very cautious about it. He says it's not a theory. He called this a series of stylized facts. He layered the whole writing with caveats, and though his research predicted in 1926 the Wall Street crash and the depression that followed it, he never claimed the power of prediction for this, saying every time the pattern is observed, it will be observed differently. But Stalin's secret police had understood, in fact, something more about Kondratiev's theory than he understood himself. They understood, if pursued to its conclusion, what this meant for Marxism was an uncomfortable proposal, that there is no final crisis of capitalism, that there can be chaos, panic, revolution, but capitalism's tendency is to morph rather than to collapse. That huge swathes of capital can be destroyed, business models scrapped, empires liquidated, global wars fought, but the system, on the evidence, survives, albeit often in a radically different form. Moreover, Kondratiev argued that the events that seemed to cause these turning points at the beginning and the end, wars, revolutions, discovery of new gold deposits, and new colonies, are in fact the effects generated by the cycle himself. Humanity, in other words, as it tries to shape economic history, is, he argued, relatively powerless over the long term to shape it. And above all, Kondratiev tells us, and this is the relevance for today, that long periods where everything's been up or down, but roughly identifiably the same kind of thing, same kind of system, these long periods do come to an end, and often they come to an end with a bang, and then after the bang, the system resets, but it looks quite different. That's basically the theory. Now, the research was based on incomplete data for 5 advanced economies. That's a quote from him, and I think I've already covered. Each new cycle takes place in different conditions. It's never a repetition. But his data was incomplete. He did what he could. He used what statistical methods he could, using the most advanced ones of the time. Basically, this trend line thing, and then moving averages, much as macroeconomic performance is measured now using the same thing. What did he come up with? Okay, this is the pattern, and this is where I think the relevance is to today. If I move away, do I still carry on being heard? Yes, good. I've reversed the arrows. So there's the down bit. There's the end of a 50-year period. This is the beginning of a 50-year period. Any old 50-year period, if the theory is right. For him, this is what happens. Before the turning point, you get a lot of technological research and innovation driven by the downturn, the need to find new ways of making a living. Then you get there what he calls the broad application of new technology and what he calls the reorganization of production, what we would call today business process re-engineering. On the basis of that, you often get an expansion of the global market. The crisis is forcing people to go out and find new markets such as they exist. And he says, what you get is a search for new sources of money. Now, until, and this is the crucial point I'll come to and explain in greater detail, until the Second World War, new source of money meant new source of precious metal. Money didn't just grow on trees, you had to have gold to back it. So this is what he observes. Now this is quite an interesting thing, isn't it? Because what he's saying is that there's a kind of sequence we go through that signals the end of a 50-year period and the beginning of another one. And it will be no mystery to you why I've done this and why I've drawn this, because as I think is demonstrable, we are going through something like that. Now, hold on a minute. For Kondratiev, there's an interesting little nerdy argument going on here about cause and effect, if you like, cause and effect arguments. For Kondratiev, a lot of people who study this right now in universities, this stuff, long waves, will know it as primarily a theory of tech innovation. A new technology brings a new period. The steam engine brings the late 19th century. The power loom in the early 19th century brings the Industrial Revolution. He didn't argue that. He argued the driving force of these movements in capitalism lie in the process of capital accumulation itself. That is, in the market for and distribution of capital, not primarily technology. So this is what he says. Look, at the end of the crisis, remember this bit here is the down bit, that's the up bit. At the end, capital accumulates faster than it can be invested. It gets locked up in the financial system. Interestingly, this is there in Kondratiev. There is an amazingly big and expensive collected works in English now, because people became so fascinated with him. Everything's there. He does say this, that the financial system begins to lock up capital at the end of the 50-year cycle. So what happens? Entrepreneurs, countries, people, businesses begin to search for the new technology, so cause and effect. Technology is the effect. They begin to search for cheaper money. In the olden days, it's gold. And they begin to search for new markets. And when they achieve that, the turning point takes place and capital begins to flow to productive new businesses. Now, why am I dwelling on this? Because if you want to get into this and start studying it and discussing it, as many of us are, then this debate about whether it's technology or whether it's the ups and downs of capitalism that is driving stuff is quite important, because it means that a new technology discovered doesn't necessarily, and even deployed, and we live in the age of deployment of massive new technologies, does not necessarily solve the problem. The problem lies at the level of capital itself. Now, what he then does is that he talks about, this is history according to Nikolai Kondratiev. The Industrial Revolution, I put 1775, that should say, to 1848, driven by the factory system and the communications alongside it, canals. Second wave, 1848 to 98, driven by railways, telegraphs, joint stock company as a business model, monopoly in its later phases. The turning point from up to down in the second big Kondratiev wave comes hey, who knew there was a long depression before the 30s? There was a long depression, and it was called the Long Depression, beginning in 1873 in the developed world, ending around about the end of the 19th century. For Kondratiev and those who came after him, most famously Joseph Schumpeter, the Austrian economist, the third wave begins around about 1898. They always choose 1898. There's something happens in the markets then. Driven by the technology of mass production, or rather accompanied by the mass deployment, I should say, of mass production and electricity, steel, which has already been invented 15 years before this, but gets rolled out on a mass basis. And also, you could say, if that period lasts till the mid-40s, you could say by one of the, of course, we know when its inflection point is, we know when the middle of the 50-year period is, because it's 1929, and we know what the down phase of that third wave looked like. It was the Great Depression. And as capitalism reacts to the negative things that are happening to it, it develops more and more of a state character. Mussolini's Italy, Hitler's Germany, Roosevelt's America. The fourth wave, those who discuss this, and for the academics among you, I'm influenced by Chris Freeman and Fernando Luca, who are two academics who study these things. They fairly convincingly describe a fourth wave beginning in 1948.